Welcome back to the second part of our trip along the four main manufacturing sites of Rolex in Switzerland. And today we'll take a closer look at the dials and do one very big discovery of what Rolex really means by quality. This Fresh Faces Special will take you on a journey through the Swiss watchmaking heartland, starting in Geneva and eventually ending up in Bienne, historically the main place for Rolex's movement development. But first we go to the largest factory of Rolex in Switzerland, which is located just outside Geneva in Plan-les-Oates. Composed of 6 wings of 65 meters long and 30 meters wide, this high-tech factory brings together all the development and production activities for cases and bracelets. From the casting of gold and the forming of raw metal to the polishing of finished components, it's all done in-house. And yes, this actually means Rolex makes its own gold. In fact, they even have an own laboratory to make their own alloys. This central laboratory was the place where the patented Ever-Rose gold and a 904L steel were developed. The laboratory is equipped with the most powerful tools, such as the scanning electron microscope, to detect the slightest imperfections. Now, in case you're wondering how special can steel be, a little bit of education. Most watch companies use 316L steel, which is very hard. It actually has a Rockwell B rating of 90 to 95. Rolex uses 904L, which is slightly softer. But this steel has better anti-corrosion properties. The only downside is it's harder to machine, so Rolex actually had to invent their own machines to make these cases. Do you like beer? So do I. Do you like watches? So do I. Please do like and subscribe. And one even more impressive part of this factory is the ceramics workshop. After Rolex chose to make its bezels from ceramic instead of steel, the company decided to set up a workshop for the development and production of this notoriously difficult material. And the result of this dedication is a very special sort of ceramic. Rolex called this invention Cerachrome and of course patented it. Now this part is really where it occurred to me just how obsessive Rolex is about anything it makes. Now you don't really see this on Instagram or rappers' videos, but this really is what Rolex is all about. This is why you gotta respect Rolex as a watchmaker. They take every molecule painstakingly seriously. Also in Plan-les-Oates there are 2 huge, and I mean huge vaults in which about a zillion different parts are stored. Now not a lot of people know this about Rolex, but they are absolutely mental about consistency. For example, for every Rolex watch sold, there will be spare parts guaranteed for 35 years after a watch was withdrawn from the catalog. The combined size of these vaults is 24,000 square meters. It even has a network on rails on which robots whiz to deliver all sorts of components all day long. In fact, they told me that the maximum time between a component being ordered and delivered in the same building is only 8 minutes. 8 minutes! The Plundleswat Facility has 11 floors, of which 6 are underground. And it is also the place where they make the Rolex Oyster cases and bracelets. The sheer size and forward-thinking character of this building elevates Rolex from any watch company I've ever seen. And it actually did make me realize something. There are more unsung heroes in the history of this company. Because this building was built under the reign of Mr. Patrick Heiniger, who succeeded his father at the helm of Rolex in 1992. Under their leadership, the company developed itself into the integrated manufacturer we know today. And by integrated manufacturer, I mean they are capable of making every part themselves. Although it must be noted that the glass and the hands are partly sourced from third parties. Now this might all seem a little bit theoretical, but it is hugely important to understand why Rolex is Rolex. And in order to know a little bit more about this, let me take you back to a time where acid was still considered a good idea, the 70s. Far from the luxury company it is today, Rolex was mainly known for tool watches. The decade before had seen the introduction of the Deep Sea Special, the Cosmograph Daytona and the Sea Dweller. But the company also had to adapt itself to quartz a technology that threatened to wipe out the entire Swiss watchmaking industry. Heading Rolex at that point was André Heiniger, the second major director, and he actually made a visionary decision to focus on mechanical watches instead of quartz. Obviously they did introduce the oyster quartz in 1977, but Mr. Heiniger said, nope, we're gonna focus on mechanical. And so they did. And with the prices of quartz watches falling, Mr. Heiniger felt that mechanical watches would add something extra, prestige. And so the focus of Mr. Heiniger became prestige, consistency and protecting the brand against the changing world, making sure its future was as secure as an oyster case. And so the fundamentals of what Rolex is nowadays is partly built on the brains of Mr. Heiniger and his son, constantly building the prestigious image of an industry leader. And to do so they had to be able to produce everything in-house. And the first step of this virtual integration was to start combining the factories. So over the decades they combined 19 different factories into the 4 they've got now. And they've actually got one more coming up in 2025. Partly buying external suppliers and partly building factories for themselves, they became the near-closed company that would control every step in the quality of their watches. Now this might all sound a little bit too theoretical again, but believe me, this is what Rolex is all about. I know it doesn't show that well on Instagram, it's totally un-Instagrammable, but this really is why Rolex is such a fantastic watchmaker. The building in Plan-les-Oates was opened in 2005 and really cemented the position of industry leadership. Rolex was completely independent and striving for perfection in every molecule, with a brand image of prestige and a product built on precision, reliability and everlasting ruggedness. And that is done every day on every level in this company, even in the more than 900 different service centers around the world. But it's also done in the smallest parts where you don't really expect it. And that really brings me to the next location, Chembur. This is where the dials are made and the gems are set. And yes, that means you can shower in diamonds here, because they actually have a machine that looks like a waterfall and that counts and weighs all the diamonds. But the watch nut inside me was a little bit more preoccupied with the dials, because this really is nuts. The production of a Rolex dial requires as much as 60 operations. Rolex actually does all these operations itself, including the stamping of the brass, the layering of the silver, gold, nickel or even meteorite. The coloring is done by hyper-modern techniques such as PVD, electrodisposition or good old lacquering. Now did you know that every Rolex dial is made up of at least 8 different layers? And that's not all. The setting of the indices is done by hand, just like the printing of the dial. The fresh face is such an important part of every watch, and at Rolex they understand it shouldn't fade after a couple of years. It has to stay fresh. A fresh face. And that really struck me. How much of this work is still done by human hands? Before my visit I thought they must be assembled by robots, like some other brands do. Rolex told me that while a lot of things can be made with robots, the best dials are achieved with the judgment of trained craftsmen. And this learned me something new about Rolex. Quality, not money, is the leading value in every step of the production chain of a Rolex watch. But to see more of that, please do stay tuned for the next part of my trip along the 4 manufacturing sites of Rolex, because in the next part we will visit the technical heart of Rolex. Don't forget to like and subscribe, otherwise you're gonna miss this and you don't want to miss it. So stay tuned, see you next time.